Yeah, she's so ready.
She's a rock star.
She's so ready.
Yes, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to Susan Hart's PhD defense. And this is just a very short introduction. I'd like to, maybe first of all, I should say we are not used to so many participants in the audience. This is definitely not usual, but this is a very beautiful space for a very special event. So, a warm welcome to you all. My name is Stine Jacobsen. I am the supervisor for Susan Hart, together with Bo, who is also in the audience, Bo Møhl. And very shortly, I'd like to introduce three other important persons in the audience who will be on stage later on. We have, so where are you? Over there. So we have Carl Henry Jacobsen from Norway, professor in psychology. We have Kathy McKinney, professor in music therapy from the US. And with us from the States is Dr. Bruce Perry, professor in psychiatry. I don't know where you are, Bruce, in the States, but you're here with us. So you can see Susan now on the stage, but we will turn off, because later on he will take part in the heart of this event, the discussion, the defense discussion. So a very well welcome to the committee as well. So Susan's been enrolled in the music therapy doctoral program, and when we do PhD defenses, it has a special format. So this is just a little bit practical information for you. The next 45 minutes, approximately, will be Susan's. She will present her work, and afterwards there is a very small break, coffee break. Basically, you go get a cup of coffee and you come back. Because then we will have the discussion where Susan, together with the committee, will discuss the PhD, the content. And this will be for 90 minutes, approximately. And if there is anybody in the audience who has read the thesis, who would like to ask a question, we might have time for that, but you'll have to approach me in the break, because you are so many, so it needs to be a very, very good question for it to come forward. And then afterwards, we will wait with Susan, because the committee has to go and discuss whether or not they will recommend that Susan will get her PhD degree or not. And this will happen in the downstairs foyer. So we'll wait for Susan and then we'll come back. So, calmly and with full trust, the stage is yours, Susan. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for all coming. I'm just so delighted that so many people are here, and I know there's both colleagues, family, friends, and all of you who took the time to come here today, I suppose in a very busy daily life. I'm just so overwhelmed, I'm just so delighted. So in the following 45 minutes, I'll tell you about my PhD, but it's only going to be in a condensed form about the method, but mostly about the results, about the clinical application, and of the emotional development scale. It's been a very, very long journey for me to stand here today. Actually, it started 29 years ago in 1989. I had just graduated as a psychologist and went into training to become a psychotherapist, and joined a group of psychologists with an interest in what to do in psychotherapy when words and narratives are not the cure. The first person we invited to inspire us was Peter Lynn, who had a PhD in medical biophysics. first time I realized the close connection between biology and psychology. Since then, much of my time has been devoted to develop neuroaffective development psychology, which is abbreviated to NADP, which I'm going to give you an introduction to in a moment. But just a few introductions before we kick off. I've got some instructions for you. So my first instruction is that the defense includes many abbreviations and acronyms, and you'll find the definitions in your handout. If you'd like help to interpreting the correlations in the psychometric analysis, a guideline is provided on page 12 in the handout you've got. A PDF file of the slides I'm using here in the presentation will shortly be made available for download on the homepage you see up here. And then I've got a warning to you, and the warning is fasten your seatbelts. This 45-minute journey is going to be a wild and high-speed ride. And afterwards, if you feel urged to applaud after the presentation, either because you felt immensely inspired or because you were bored stiff and you're relieved it's over, you are more than welcome. So let's head into the first thing, the background of NADP and Emotional Development Scale, the EDS. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the development of the nervous system because that's the foundation of the NADP. That is the structure of the nervous system determines what interactions are possible, and what we get from the outside world feeds back into the brain, into the structures of the brain. Also that emotional, sensory motor and cognitive development processes follow different paths but are closely interconnected. Also that NADP is a theory of emotional development, not cognitive development, not sensory motor development, but emotional development. And here we've got the three learning domains. As you see, they are really interconnected, but NADP is a map especially on emotional development. So NADP, a map for understanding a complex emotional landscape. And how did this development come through? Well, since the mid-1990s, in collaboration with my dear friend and psychotherapist, Marianne Benson, we developed this NADP together as an aid to understanding human personality development. So NADP is based on an integration of developmental psychology, attachment theory, trauma studies, and brain research. So what is emotional development about? Well, the complexity of intersubjectivity. We've got a parent here, and the parent has got a lot of experience by being in the world, and this experience the parent has to give to the child, and that happens through the interaction, through the intersubjectivity. And of course, the intersubjectivity is an essential innate capacity. So the capacity is inborn, but emotions connect us and form attachment, and the nervous system reacts to everything that happens, whether it's exciting or frustrating. So the child's relationship to adults gets integrated into his or her neural circuits, and that's what forms the personality from the inborn capacity. So let's have just a slight look of how this happens. Well, this has been created through rhythm, tempo, and interactive sensitivity in the interpersonal music that create new experiences of meaningful states of experiences, as Dan Stern, he explained us years ago. Also, that these micro-regulation processes stimulates the brain's emotional structures and generate emotional development. The feeling of being connected arises through the mutual influence between the caregiver and the child. And engagement in shared activities is established through timed and synchronized regulations. That's the music, the non-verbal music that's between us. That's the music that we very seldom stick our consciousness to. It's our implicit knowledge. So let's just have a look and see how this synchronization and how these now moments, how they happen in real life. So these small now moments lead to a sense of vitality that develops the nervous system emerging capacity for self-regulation and attention control. That's a very basic part that happens in our autonomic nervous system, which I'm going to get back to in a moment. So what Tronick said years ago is that self-regulation of temper, mood, and emotions is learned through the co-regulation of interaction. That's our implicit knowledge that happens here. But another concept I'd like to bring into the field is the concept from Vygotsky, who said that development proceeds from external regulation to internal regulation. So something that happens implicitly shared between two people as an interpersonal event becomes an inner intrapersonal psychic ability in our nervous system. So it's all these synchronizations that happens between us that becomes a part of our personality and our self-regulation capacity. So the theoretical foundation of NAP, if we have to understand it in the development perspective, we've got that in the brain consists of a hierarchy of functional levels. That's the concept of, for instance, John Hewland's Jackson. And that structures develop progressively and in turn become subordinate to later developing structures. Also that there's a gradual increase of complexity as the brain matures, and that environmental deficits or neurological setbacks may initiate subsequent development dysfunctions. So that's, in a way to understand the brain. And what we did was that we brought in the understanding of the neurologist Paul MacLean, who developed this very heuristic, metaphoric construction of the human brain. He developed this model which he named the triune brain. And in the triune brain, which is really a simplistic heuristic model, he started off by saying that on the basic level of the brain, we've got the autonomic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system's job is to arouse and regulate, and it's got to do with body sensations. And if we look into that in the emotional development, there's a big window of opportunity for this type of development from we are born until we are about 3 months of age. That's where we've got this basic synchronization. And then on top of that, we've got the limbic system, and that's where we've got the affective attunement, which Dan Stern taught us so much about. That's the categorical emotions, where it's possible to see different types of social categorical emotions in the face, which happens between we are 3 and 12 months of age. And on top of that, we've got the prefrontal level, which deals with acts of will, with impulse control, with language, with mentalization. And there is a very, very long emotional period, development period here that kicks on, big window of opportunity from about 1 year of age until we're about 23 years of age. And of course, the brain develops the whole life through. So how did I get from NADP to the Emotional Development Scale to EDS? Well, when working in a child psychiatric ward, which I did from 1998 to 2001, making psychological assessments with the referred children, I found it so strange that so many assessment methods were devoted to development of cognitive functions. But when assessing emotional functions, we use projective methods developed in the 1920s on a strict psychoanalytical foundation, the Rorschach, the CAT, the TAT, or questionnaires of self-reporting or reporting from parents and teachers. All the children in the psychiatric ward, they came to the psychiatric ward regarding emotional problems, but we did not have any assessment methods to help us measuring emotional development. So NADP gave the theoretical frame. And in 2012, NADP was so developed that it was possible to start the development of the EDS. So in 2016, I was ready to make this empirical study, which is the reason why I'm here today. So let's dig into the purpose of the research study. But what is EDS and what is it intended to measure? Well, the EDS is designed to assess emotional development within an NADP frame to determine the emotional functions of 4 to 12-year-olds. It's intended to tailor structured and specific intervention plans within the zone of the emotional proximal zone of development, with an awareness of regressive and dissociative states. And in the research study, the EDS was used to test if the emotional progression described in NADP, autonomic, limbic, prefrontal, is consistent with the empirical findings. So let's have a look at the purpose of the research and the research questions. You know, if somebody told me years ago that I was going to make a PhD focusing on a fixed design with quantitative data, I would have told them they had gone nuts. But here I am, and why? Well, because it's part of an effort to develop and bring more structured measurement tools based on NADP into the clinical work in order to obtain relevant structured information to guide interventions. So the purpose of the research is to investigate the reliability and the validity of the EDS. The study consists of a fixed design with quantitative data and statistical analysis, and is based on a correlational analysis. The study rests on pragmatism and post-positivism, which means that human beings are very, very complex. Human relationships are composed of different dimensions and interrelated truths, so objectivity is impossible. And no ultimate truth exists, and research is imperfect and fallible. So this is a concern for practical matters that is guided by practical experiences rather than solely by theory. So, we've got the research questions. And I just warn you here, because the measurement tools may be difficult to grasp here. but they will be explained later on. So let's have a look at the first research question. What are the psychometric properties of the EDS, including reliability and validity of the autonomic, limbic, and prefrontal and total scores on the EDSP and the EDS scale? Research question 2. Is the correlation between autonomic, limbic, and prefrontal scores on both the EDSP and EDSA predictive of emotional development progression as described in NADP? And I'll turn back to what EDSP and EDSA a bit later. And the third question, what is the correlation between the tested children's emotional development as measured using the EDS, parent-child intersubjectivity, what happens between the child and the caregiver, as measured using the Marshak interaction method of psychometrics, and a parental mentalizing capacity as measured using the neuroaffective mentalizing interview. So, and also, to examine the validity of the EDS, it is also correlated with 2 evidence-based standard questionnaires, and they're called the PSI and PCRI. So that's some of the abbreviations you've got in your handout. So let's have a look at the literature, only very briefly here. So we've got the literature here, and before this empirical study was initiated, I had to make a literature review to test the assumption that I had that it was difficult to find measurement tools that focused specifically on emotional development. And the literature review, it focused on measurement tools aimed at 4 to 12-year-olds, children's emotional development, their competencies and their vulnerabilities. The literature revealed that it is relevant to develop a measurement tool that offers helpful information on emotional age-specific development, because no measurement method was found that divides emotional dimensions into mental organizations and looks at emotional development apart from Bruce Perry's NMT. So let's have a look at the design and the method of my PhD. Well, participants. 36 participants, 4 to 12-year-olds, each with 1 parent from 8 different family treatment centers in Denmark, were included in my study. And there was 1 dropout. All referred to a municipality family treatment center due to family-related difficulties. There was 2 psychologists at each family treatment center who administered the test. And these 18 psychologists, they were 16 women and 2 men. It seems as if we're many more female psychologists than male psychologists. 35 children completed the EDS performance test and also the EDS assessment protocols. They were completed, and 26 completed the performance test of the test retest. In this project, there was also a sample because the EDS is developed in collaboration with Hårgreffen Limited. So Hårgreffen is not a part of my study, and only data that were found to be relevant to elucidate certain aspects of my study were included. This was not planned, but we needed Hårgreffen's study to look at differences between referred and non-referred, because none of the children in my study, they were non-referred. So the ad hoc analysis of non-referred and referred groups included Hochrefer Limited's investigation data with 213 participants, and included with my study, it came up to 64 referred and 184 non-referred. And as you see here, no significant variations was found regarding the children's age and gender. So let's have a look at the data collection. A 2-hour webinar with all the psychologists from my study and all the psychologists from the Hochrefer study, they were included. We had this 2-hour webinar. Also, to ensure inter-rater reliability, the 2 psychologists from each family treatment center had to remain unaware of each other's scorings. So what we did was that the assessment sessions for the EDSP, the performance part, were video recorded by the first psychologist, by psychologist 1, in order for psychologist 2 to conduct the blinded rating. And this was done to ensure the inter-rater reliability. And to ensure test-retest reliability, within 2 to 4 weeks, the child was retested with the EDSP, the performance part. The assessment part was only conducted by one of the psychologists, and no study of test-retest reliability was conducted here. So let's have a look at the psychometric analysis of reliability. It was possible to conduct the intended analysis because the data behaved in a way consistent with using parametric statistics. And I'm going through this slide because it's something I have to tell, even I'm aware that it probably won't make sense for the most of you. And I hope that when we come to the results, it's going to give a bit more meaning. So let's see what there is to say about the psychometric analysis. Well, inter-rater reliability regarding the performance part, I used the ICC, the inter-class correlation. And test-retest regarding the performance part, I used Pearson's correlation and the internal consistency, which reveal how different scores or items of scores relate to each other of the EDS performance part. And the assessment part, I used Cronbach's alpha and Pearson's correlation. But I'll continue in a hurry here. So let's look at the different types of validity. I use concurrent validity because it investigates the ability of the EDS to differentiate between referred and non-referred groups. An independent t-test was conducted here. The predictive validity, which investigates the progression between the levels of mental organization, the predictive validity was calculated by finding the mean in percentage of the 3 levels: autonomic, limbic, and prefrontal scores. And since no measurement tools were found that matched the exclusive focus on emotional development, the construct validity was analyzed by correlating the EDS with the interaction between the parent and the child, and the mentalization capacity of the parent, and the evidence-based questionnaires, the PSI and the PCI, even though I knew this wasn't perfect, but that was the best I had. So here I used Pearson's correlation, and an alpha level of 0.5 was used here. So let's go into the measurement tools. Just to frame the measurement tools here, we've got EDS performance, emotional development performance. We've got emotional development assessment, which deals with the child. And then we've got the MIMP, which looks at the intersubjectivity. And then we've got the EDSA, the assessment, and probably you are aware that it's got EDSA where the parents are and also where the child is. And I get back to that in a little while. And we've also here got the neuroaffective mentalizing interview and the PSI and the PCRI. But why? Why like this? Because sometimes in studies you do get a bit surprised. And one of my surprises here was that we thought that we had told the psychologist in a very informative way that the EDSA assessment was about having a lot of informants that could give some informations of the child that we couldn't get in the performance test. But what we actually found out was that very many of the psychologists had used it as a way of finding the parents' internal representations of the child. But I go back to that in a little while. So let's have a look at the EDS performance test and the EDS assessment. The EDS is designed to measure children's emotional competencies and vulnerabilities from a developmental perspective at the present functional level. It's not a way of diagnosing the child, it's a way of finding the functional level here and now. The EDS performance is based on a performance test and the EDS assessment is based on a structured assessment. And the EDSP and the EDSA are designed to support each other. Both the EDSP and the EDSA aim to assess 3 individual levels of mental organization. And a total score is found by adding up the 3 levels, the autonomic level, the limbic level, and the prefrontal level. The EDSP performance consists of 18 activities, which are divided into 54 items that the psychologist has to answer. So we've got on the autonomic level 13 items, on the limbic level 12 items, and on the prefrontal level 29 items that the psychologists have to answer. The EDSA consists of 2 parts. It consists of 19 questions regarding predisposing, perpetuating, provocative, and protective factors. So that's everything about the child in the past. Part 2 of our assessment tool consists of 39 questions, and it involves asking as many informants, that was what it was meant to, ask as many informants as possible who know the child well about the child's emotional competencies and vulnerabilities outside the clinical setting. So the psychologist was meant to score the answers from that. And we've got the autonomic level here, 15 questions, limbic level, 10 questions, and prefrontal level, 14 questions. Oops. The EDS, the scoring system for both the EDSP and the EDSA is a 4-point continuum scale ranging from 1 to 4. So we've got level 1, that's dysfunctional, 2, unbalanced, 3, mildly unbalanced, and 4, well-regulated. So I'm just going to give you an example here, because there is a question, activity 7, in our performance part. It says, is the child capable of imitating grimaces and activating eye contact, facial synchronization, and liveliness in interaction with the other? So I'd like you, and because I'm not close to you, I want you to imitate this face together with me. And what about this one? be one of the activities we make together with the child. Another example here is that we ask the child, and they see that elderly lady in a booklet, and the question is the child capable of recognizing different emotional expressions in another space? And we've got these emotions here: fear, surprise, happy, angry, sad, and disgust. So if we have a look at this face, what would you say that is? Angry, that's right. And if you see this face, disgust, yes. And if you see this face, happy. And if you see this face, sad. And if you see this face, that's what I'm feeling right now. Fear. And if you see this face, surprise! Yeah. So that's what we are looking at on the limbic level. So let's see an example of what we look at on the prefrontal level. Is the child capable of distinguishing between authentic and false emotions? So now I'm going to show you two small video clips, which they are actually in the test together with, we make them together with the children. So you're going to see two small clips now, and I want you to tell me which one was the authentic. And the first one is the emotion, the category emotion of happy.
Tusind tak skal du have for det. Jeg er godt nok glad for. Wow, det skulle du ikke have gjort. Tak. Tusind tak, det er jeg så glad for. Jeg har overhovedet ikke regnet med. Tak skal du have. Tak.
So, which one was the authentic, the first or the second? Second, that's right. And let's take another one, angry.
Simpelthen så vred over nogle af mine pågørelser. Det kan jeg godt sige dig. Jeg er hamrende vred, og jeg finder mig ikke i det. Det kan jeg godt sige dig.
So, the second one?
Jeg er virkelig vred over det. Det er utroligt, at der er nogen, der kan finde på at gøre sådan noget. Altså, det er virkelig meget vred over. Utrolig vred over.
So, the first or the second? The first, that's right. And then we take the last one, which regards the emotion shame.
Var det pinligt? Ej, det kan jeg slet ikke. Ej, det er nok det mest pinlige, jeg nogensinde har gjort det her. Ej, det er jeg virkelig flov over. Ej, det kan jeg slet ikke overskue her. Ej. Ej, det er virkelig pinligt. Men undskyld.
The first or the second? The first one. So, just small samples of the EDSA. I just mentioned one of them. Are there any factors that currently affect the child, stress the child either physically or mentally? That would be one of the questions in part one. And if we look at part two, let's just take one on the autonomic level. Does the child have stable circadian rhythm, sleep patterns, and so on? Because it's not possible to see that in a performance part where you just see the child for 60 minutes. And if just to say a few words about the Marshak interaction methods of psychometrics. It's developed in Chicago, not the psychometric part. I made the psychometric part, and it's an observation of structured interaction between caregiver and child. It consists of 10 activities, which are video recorded and rated on 5 dimensions: structure, synchronization, engagement, nurture, and challenge. And the rating scale is a continuous scale from 1 to 9, and it scores the 5 dimension in relation to both the caregiver's ability to support the child and the child's ability to accept what the caregiver offers within the dimension. And this was validated together with the neuroaffective mentalizing interview. It's a structured interview to measure parents' mentalizing capacity. And it consists of 14 questions which are asked and answered in a video recorded session. And the one I want you to be most aware of, because hopefully I'm going into a discussion with the committee in a moment, I hope. That's the part B, perception of the child and relationship with the child, to see how that influences the interaction and the EDS. Also here, the scale is a continuous scale from 0 to 4, and it's based on the level of three things: the level of mental language, the body language, and the interaction with the interviewer. And it's actually a test that I have developed with 3 other psychology colleagues. And let's continue to the results and the discussion, because time is running. And I'd like to just show you some of the results from the inter-rater reliability and the test-retest. So in the inter-rater reliability, there was a significant positive correlation between the scorings of psychologists 1 and 2. And that suggests a strong inter-rater reliability. If we look at the test-retest, a significant positive correlation was found in the test-retest analysis of the EDSP, which indicates a strong correlation between the first and the second testing, which I was very thrilled about, of course. So let's have a look at the internal consistency. The 4 different scores of EDSP appear to have good internal consistency. And if we look at the scores on the EDSA, that also appeared to have a good internal consistency. If we look at the 4 scores in respectively the EDSP and the EDSA, it also appeared to have a good internal consistency. But now the problem starts. Because if we look at the 2 together, what I found was a correlation between the scores on the performance part and the assessment part ranged from 0.084 to 0.400. This indicates that the scores on the EDSP and the EDSA do not have similar features, which I was very unhappy about. So the scale measures different qualities of different constructs that correlate slightly. It would therefore be inappropriate to calculate a total score of the performance part and the assessment part. If we look at the test ability to distinguish between groups, I had the referred group, and I had the referred group and the non-referred group. 64 in the referred, 184 in the non-referred. And if we look at the significance, we see that that's a p-value, which is very well because it's below 0.5. And what we see here, that there is a difference when you look at the autonomic and the non-referred level, because the non-referred children, they manage the test better, both on the autonomic and the limbic and the prefrontal levels, and also, of course, on the total score. So this may reveal that emotional imbalances or family-related dysfunctions that motivated the referral of the child cause setbacks in the development of emotional functions. Significant differences were revealed between referred and non-referred 4 to 8-year-olds in terms of scores on the autonomic, prefrontal and total level on the EDSP, because I divided them into 2 groups, 4 to 8-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-olds. And what you see here, that is, on the limbic level, for the 4 to 8-year-olds, there was no difference between the non-referred and the referred group. So probably we're going to get back to that later on in the discussion with the committee members. Significant differences were revealed between referred and non-referred 9 to 12-year-olds, so that was quite satisfying. So, and progression in competencies were reviewed between 4 to 8-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-olds, both in the referred and non-referred groups, so it helped to get older. The brain got more matured and had more capacity to self-regulate. What may this indicate? This may indicate that the EDS is capable of capturing differences in the progression of emotional competencies between 4 to 8-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-olds. It may also indicate that it may be possible to measure the extent of developmental disorders amongst 4 to 8-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-olds. So, and if we have a look at this, well, there was something about emotional progression. This is just an example, so it's not taken from real life. But it's just to give you an example of that you can have a mature level when you add up the total score. But what we look at too are whether they are balanced or not. If we look at the first one, it's very developed and it's regulated. Here there's more foundation on the autonomic level than the limbic level, and there's more foundation on the limbic level compared to the prefrontal level, which is good because that gives more emotional stability. And if we look at the developed but dysregulated, we see that the autonomic level system is quite developed, and the prefrontal is quite developed too, but the limbic system is a bit squashed. So, and here we've got a prefrontal level that sort of have taken over, but the structures beneath the neocortex, they are very unstable, very immature. And here we see two examples of immature and dysregulated and immature and dysregulated. So if we look at the progression between the three scores, for the referred group, a clear indication of progression on both the EDSP and EDSA was found through all age groups and both genders. A similarly clear result was strangely enough not found on the non-referred group due to a low limbic level on the EDSP and a high limbic level on the EDSA. So, however, the autonomic and prefrontal levels are well balanced with a clear progression on the two levels of both the EDSP and EDSA. The tendency is found in both the groups of referred group and non-referred group. So what we actually saw here was more in the non-referred was sort of this structure you see here in the middle with the squashed limbic system. So the substantial difference between the referred and the non-referred on the autonomic and prefrontal levels and the lack of differentiation of score levels on the limbic level may be due to the inability of the EDS to capture emotional development on the limbic level, or insufficient training of the psychologists, or small sample size, or the fact that the calculation of the mean is based on MAC scores and general trends in society. And I really hope that we're going to dig into that in the discussion with the committee members later on. So the results of the correlation in the validity between the MIMP and the EDS, significant and modest correlation between a few of the interaction scores and the EDS scores was found. The population was for that reason divided into 4 to 8-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-olds. And what I found here was a significant and modest correlation for 4 to 8-year-olds in an expected direction, especially on nurture dimensions between the parent and the child. If we look at the 9 to 12-year-olds, I did also find a significant and modest correlation, but mostly especially on the challenge dimension. So these findings suggest the emotional functions of 4 to 8-year-olds is more dependent on parents' way of offering regulation, engagement and nurture the 9 to 12-year-olds. And that 9 to 12-year-olds need their parents to challenge them in an appropriate way to develop emotional self-regulatory capacity. If we look at the correlations between the mentalizing interview and the emotional development scale, no direct correlations was found in the parent's mentalizing capacity and the child's emotional competencies, as no significant correlations was found between the NMI and the EDSP. Probably that's because parental mentalization capacity is not the only important factor for the emotional development for 4 to 12-year-olds. It also could be that important family members or adults to whom the child is closely related may have a special impact on the child's emotional development. We could see that through psychotherapy, for instance, or that the child's inherent capacity for self-regulation is more dependent on whom the child interacts with than the parent's mentalizing capacity. So let's have a look at the limitations and further research. I've put this into what I call the neuroaffective triangle, which is to show the limitations through this triangle. So we've got theory up on the top, and a problem could be that we need more subtle aspects of limbic capacity, and the theory might maybe be described a bit more to describe the EDS, to describe of imitating grimaces and activating eye contact, facial synchronization and liveliness in interaction with the other. So I'd like you, and because I'm not close to you, I want you to imitate this face together with me. And what about this one? And what about this one? So that's actually one of the activities we make together with the child. Another example here is that we ask the child, and they see that elderly lady in a booklet, and the question is the child capable of recognizing different emotional expressions in another space? And we've got these emotions here: fear, surprise, happy, angry, sad, and disgust. So if we have a look at their space, what would you say that is? Angry, that's right. And if you see this face, disgust, yes. And if you see this face, happy. And if you see this face, sad. And if you see this face, that's what I'm feeling right now. Fear. And if you see this face, surprise! Yeah. So that's what we are looking at on the limbic level. So let's see an example of what we look at on the prefrontal level. Is the child capable of distinguishing between authentic and false emotions? So now I'm going to show you two small video clips, which they are actually in the test together with, we make them together with the children. So you're going to see two small clips now, and I want you to tell me which one was the authentic. And the first one is the emotion, the category emotion of happy.
Tusind tak skal du have for det. Jeg er godt nok glad for. Wow, det skulle du ikke have gjort. Tak. Tusind tak, det er jeg så glad for. Jeg har overhovedet ikke regnet med. Tak skal du have. Tak.
So, which one was the authentic, the first or the second? Second, that's right. And let's take another one, angry.
Simpelthen så vred over nogle af dine pågørelser. Det kan jeg godt sige dig. Jeg er hammerende vred, og jeg finder mig ikke i det. Det kan jeg godt sige dig.
So, the second one?
Jeg er virkelig vred over det. Egentlig er der nogen, der kan finde på at gøre sådan noget. Altså det er virkelig meget vred over. utrolig vred over det.
So the first and the second. The first, that's right. And then we'll take the last one, which regards the emotion shame.
Var det pinligt? Ej, det kan jeg slet ikke. Ej, det er nok det mest pinlige, jeg nogensinde har gjort det her. Ej, det er jeg virkelig flov over. Ej, det kan jeg slet ikke overskue her. Ej. Ej, det er virkelig pinligt. Men undskyld.
Well, the first and the second. The first one. So, just as just small samples of the EDSA. I just mentioned one of them. Are there any factors that currently affect the child, stress the child either physically or mentally? That would be one of the questions in part 1. And if we look at part 2, let's just take one on the autonomic level. Does the child have stable circadian rhythm, sleep patterns, and so on? Because it's not possible to see that in a performance part where you just see the child for 60 minutes. And if just to say a few words about the Marshak interaction methods of psychometrics. It's developed in Chicago, not the psychometric part. I made the psychometric part, and it's an observation of structured interaction between caregiver and child. It consists of 10 activities, which are video recorded and rated on 5 dimensions: structure, synchronization, engagement, nurture, and challenge. And the rating scale is a continuous scale from 1 to 9, and it scores the 5 dimension in relation to both the caregiver's ability to support the child and the child's ability to accept what the caregiver offers within the dimension. And this was validated together with the neuroaffective mentalizing interview. It's a structured interview to measure parents' mentalizing capacity. And it consists of 14 questions which are asked and answered in a video recorded session. And the one I want you to be most aware of, because hopefully I'm going into a discussion with the committee in a moment, I hope. That's the part B, perception of the child and relationship with the child, to see how that influences the interaction and the EDS. Also here, the scale is a continuous scale from 0 to 4, and it's based on the level of 3 things: the level of mental language, the body language, and the interaction with the interviewer. And it's actually a test that I have developed with 3 other psychology colleagues. And let's continue to the results and the discussion, because time is running. And I'd like to just show you some of the results from the inter-rater reliability and the test-retest. So in the inter-rater reliability, there was a significant positive correlation between the scorings of psychologists 1 and 2. And that suggests a strong inter-rater reliability. If we look at the test-retest, a significant positive correlation was found in the test-retest analysis of the EDSP, which indicates a strong correlation between the first and the second testing, which I was very thrilled about, of course. So let's have a look at the internal consistency. The 4 different scores of EDSP appear to have good internal consistency. And if we look at the scores on the EDSA, that also appear to have a good internal consistency. If we look at the 4 scores in respectively the EDSP and the EDSA, it also appeared to have a good internal consistency. But now the problem starts. Because if we look at the 2 together, what I found was a correlation between the scores on the performance part and the assessment part ranged from 0.084 to 0.400. This indicates that the scores on the EDSP and the EDSA do not have similar features, which I was very unhappy about. So the scale measures different qualities of different constructs that correlate slightly. It would therefore be inappropriate to calculate a total score of the performance part and the assessment part. If we look at the test ability to distinguish between groups, I had the referred group, and I had the referred group and the non-referred group. 64 in the referred, 184 in the non-referred. And if we look at the significance, we see that that's a p-value, which is very well because it's below 0.5. And what we see here, that there is a difference when you look at the autonomic and the non-referred level, because the non-referred children, they manage the test better, both on the autonomic and the limbic and the prefrontal levels, and also, of course, on the total score. So this may reveal that emotional imbalances or family-related dysfunctions that motivated the referral of the child cause setbacks in the development of emotional functions. Significant differences were revealed between referred and non-referred 4 to 8-year-olds in terms of scores on the autonomic, prefrontal and total level on the EDSP, because I divided them into 2 groups, 4 to 8-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-olds. And what you see here, that is, on the limbic level, for the 4 to 8-year-olds, there was no difference between the non-referred and the referred group. So probably we're going to get back to that later on in the discussion with the committee members. Significant differences were revealed between referred and non-referred 9 to 12-year-olds, so that was quite satisfying. So, and progression in competencies were revealed between 4 to 8-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-olds, both in the referred and non-referred groups, so it helped to get older. The brain got more matured and had more capacity to self-regulate. What may this indicate? This may indicate that the EDS is capable of capturing differences in the progression of emotional competencies between 4 to 8-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-olds. It may also indicate that it may be possible to measure the extent of developmental disorders amongst 4 to 8-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-olds. So, and if we have a look at this, there was something about emotional progression. This is just an example, so it's not taken from real life, but it's just to give you an example of that you can have a mature level when you add up the total score, but what we look at too are whether they are balanced or not. If we look at the first one, it's very developed and it's regulated. Here there's more foundation on the autonomic level than the limbic level, and there's more foundation on the limbic level compared to the prefrontal level, which is good because that gives more emotional stability. And if we look at the developed but dysregulated, we see that the autonomic nervous system is quite developed, and the prefrontal is quite developed too, but the limbic system is a bit squashed. So, and here we've got a prefrontal level that sort of have taken over, but the structures beneath the neocortex, they are very unstable, very immature. And here we see two examples of immature and dysregulated and immature and dysregulated. So if we look at the progression between the three scores, for the referred group, a clear indication of progression on both the EDSP and EDSA was found through all age groups and both genders. A similarly clear result was strangely enough not found on the non-referred group due to a low limbic level on the EDSP and a high limbic level on the EDSA. So however, the autonomic and prefrontal levels are well balanced with a clear progression on the two levels of both the EDSP and EDSA, the tendency is found in both the groups of referred group and non-referred group. So what we actually saw here was more in the non-referred was sort of this structure you see here in the middle with the squashed limbic system. So the substantial difference between the referred and the non-referred on the autonomic and prefrontal levels and the lack of differentiation of score levels on the limbic level may be due to the inability of the EDS to capture emotional development on the limbic level, or insufficient training of the psychologists, or small sample size, or the fact that the calculation of the mean is based on MAP scores and general trends in society. And I really hope that we're going to dig into that in the discussion with the committee members later on. So the results of the correlation in the validity between the MIMP and the EDS, significant and modest correlation between a few of the interaction scores and the EDS scores was found. The population was for that reason divided into 48-year-olds and 9 to 12-year-olds. And what I found here was a significant and modest correlation for 48-year-olds in an expected direction, especially on nurture dimensions between the parent and the child. If we look at the 9 to 12-year-olds, I did also find a significant and modest correlation, but mostly especially on the challenge dimension. So these findings suggest the emotional functions of 48-year-olds is more dependent on parents' way of offering regulation, engagement, and nurture than 9 to 12-year-olds. And that 9 to 12-year-olds need their parents to challenge them in an appropriate way to develop emotional self-regulatory capacity. If we look at the correlations between the mentalizing interview and the emotional development scale, no direct correlations was found in the parent's mentalizing capacity and the child's emotional competencies, as no significant correlations was found between the NMI and the EDSP. Probably that's because parental mentalization capacity is not the only important factor for the emotional development for 4 to 12-year-olds. It also could be that important family members or adults to whom the child is closely related may have a special impact on the child's emotional development. We could see that through psychotherapy, for instance. Or that the child's inherent capacity for self-regulation is more dependent on whom the child interacts with than the parent's mentalizing capacity. So let's have a look at the limitations and further research. I've put this into what I call the neuroaffective triangle, just to show the limitations through this triangle. So we've got theory up on the top, and a problem could be that we need more subtle aspects of limbic capacity, and the theory might maybe be described a bit more to describe the EDS, to describe to capture the limbic aspects, that the theory is not thorough enough describing limbic capacity. We could have a look at the other angle in the triangle, the method, and we've got two methods here. We've got a research method and we've got a measurement tool. And regarding the research method, we've got a small sample size, we've got lack of a blinded study, we've got lack of comparing the results with another similar test. And regarding the measurement tool, number and design of activities and the related items may not adequately measure limbic competencies. And then we've got the self-agent part with the psychologists, the testers. The training for the administering the EDS was not sufficient. And the assessor's agency and interaction may really well have influenced the results. What about further research? Well, larger normative sample of children randomly recruited with no inclusion criteria for clinical or non-clinical features, determine what the EDS assessment part, what it is intended to measure, what does it measure and what is it intended to measure. Determine if and how the EDSP and EDSA may supplement each other. And determine whether the EDSP is a suitable pre- and post-assessment method by making an effect study. Measuring the progression of scores between the autonomic, limbic, and prefrontal levels. Determine how psychologists' interactions with the child and their administration of the test influence the fidelity of the EDS. And studies of 4 to 2-year-olds' limbic capacity in general. So, clinical application and conclusion. EDS provided a structured method for evaluating the child's emotional competencies using psychometric measures at the present functional level. Also guiding professionals on how to approach and support the child's emotional capacities on both implicit and explicit levels. Helping to reduce the cost of interventions by tailoring the interventions to the child's zone of proximal development. Actually, in this country, we use 14,000 billion Danish kroner a year for helping people in trouble. So helping to reduce the cost. Assessing the child and the child's relational environment in order to understand the child's competencies and vulnerabilities within the influence of a relational environment. Furthermore, the children, most of the children that was tested with the EDS said that the children find the assessment enjoyable. It was fun. So let's have a look at the conclusion. The EDS is a consistent, reliable and valid measure of 4 to 12-year-olds children's emotional development. The research showed a difference between referred and non-referred groups, as well as an age progression between 4 to 8 and 9 to 12-year-olds. It is unclear exactly what the EDS assessment measures, and until further research has been conducted, the structured assessment interview can only be used as a clinical instrument. So the study suggests that the EDS offers a consistent, the PEDSP offers a consistent measure of emotional competencies and vulnerabilities of 4 to 12-year-olds and is suited for determining emotional developmental age. What's the vision? The vision is that the NADP may contribute to a paradigm shift from a categorical diagnostic system of mental vulnerability to a dynamic understanding of the development of self-regulating capacity regarding temper, emotions, and mood. That this paradigm shift will leave us with a positive view that dysregulation can be changed to self-regulation through positive interactions with others. The EDS may be used to tailor intervention plans and to determine the most beneficial intervention method aimed at the child's emotional zone of development. Well, I have reached the end of my presentation. I hope you've been able to understand just a little bit of this research study, and I hope that you found just some of the elements interesting. Before I stop this defense, there is one thing that's left for me to say. This project wouldn't have been possible without many, many people's help, both during the years and now. And I would so much like to thank my two supervisors, Stine Lindahl. Where are you, Stine? Oh, you're up there. Hi. To thank Stine and Bo Mø. Where are you, Bo? You are there. So thank you so much for your help. And many of you that's here today, I really do appreciate your support so very, very much. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. What a ride. So, people, you have just 10-15 minutes to grab a cup of coffee and hurry back if you want to take part, because we will close the doors before we start. So just go and have a break and come back.
I wish you could see the place. It's a lovely music hall.
I heard they had to move it to the music hall because so many people wanted to come and listen to you. That's a pretty cool thing.
A bit scary too, but
Yeah, you did great.
I mean, a shy person talking to another shy person.
This is the way to go. You actually feel like you're, I can't see anybody. I don't have to wear pants,
The audience enjoyed their comment.
It's a bit cold, but it's not so cold. Yeah, it snows. I saw Stina had pictures of snow.
Please find your seats. We will start in 30 seconds.
29,
28. Ding dong.
22, 21, 20.
Okay, I think I'll start because we want this setup to have time. So I welcome you all back now to this discussion part of the defense. I hope you all had a chance to get a cup of coffee and some sweets. I hope that you here on stage can see and hear each other. Just for you to know that you can see Bruce here to the left of me, and these lovely three people can see Bruce on stage here. So they try to, because the camera is here, so they have a live conversation. So that's the setup, just for you to understand. So it's a bit difficult to do like this, but we are so thrilled, Bruce, that you're able to be here with us. So this is a very nice setup with the circumstances.
My pleasure.
So let me just now introduce you to the committee. Here we have Carl Henry Jacobsen. He is professor in psychology at the Department of Psychology at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim. He is a true pioneer within his field of child psychology, investigating neurobiology, emotional regulation and development, including an understanding of attention as part of child's development. For many years, he's done clinical research and training at the university, and he has an impressive list of national and international publications, including articles, books, book chapters, conference papers, and many more. So please give a warm welcome to Hart. So with me here on this stage screen is Dr. Bruce Perry, who is a senior fellow at the Child Trauma Academy in Houston. He's an adjunct professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University in Chicago. He has held many esteemed academic positions and has been an active teacher, clinician, researcher in children's mental health and the neurosciences, doing both basic neurosciences and clinical research, and with a focus on integrating emerging principles of developmental neurosciences into clinical practice, hereby developing widely known practices such as the NMI, the NME, the NMS, etc. The list is long. It's an impressive list, as Susan also referred to in her presentation. Dr. Perry has a 500-plus publication list and has received several awards and honors, so please make Bruce feel welcome on stage. Last but not least, we have the chair of the committee, the woman in charge, Dr. Kathy McKinney, who is a professor, coordinator, founding director of the Appalachian State Music Therapy Program in Boone, North Carolina. Her area of research is effect studies, mainly within GIM interventions, but also many other quantitative studies, such as comparative studies, as we have here today. She has extensive clinical experience across a wide range of population. She is the editor of the Journal of Association for Music and Imagery. She has several past president positions within the field of music therapy, and also with an impressive publication list, several awards, and honored. We are proud to call her colleague, as she is also a joint professor here at Auburn University. So please give a warm welcome as I give the floor to Kathy.
Well, Susan, we've come to the day. A very exciting day. And thank you for your lovely and energetic presentation of your work. And we have some exciting things to discuss with you today. And I'm going to ask that Carl open this with the first question.
Thank you. I'd like to congratulate you with your thesis, which is very good, and your stunning performance at the presentation. And Kathy and I discussed how to warm you, and we realized we have to calm you down. You started out with telling your professional history very briefly, and I think it's very important for your work, your professional history, and it's I see the thesis as a continuation of your life work. So if you could take us briefly through your professional career, we would like.
You'd like me to do that, yes. You know, it's really a long story, so if it's too long, please stop me. Yes, because actually, I use this slide sometimes with my pre-defense, this one, the long and winding road. And, that's really what I think it has been since I finished my Master of Science degree in October 1987. So that's really, been a long, long journey since those days. And I've just, made, to see what I've done for all these years, because sometimes they just pass by. And, first of all, I worked as a consultant psychologist in a municipality just outside of Copenhagen. And that was when I took my training as a Gestalt therapist, because that was very trendy in those days, in the end of the 1980s. And that was a 4-year-old study. And I met a wonderful chief psychologist from our adult psychiatric ward, and I was invited into a group of psychologists what to do when words is not the cure. And that was just in the beginning of the 1990s, where all the brain research and had just come online. And I suppose because of the neuroimaging, the PET scans and the fMRI scans, that was also new in those days. And I was just taken into it, because at the same time, as you see up here, from 89 until 91, I worked as a psychologist in another municipality in Zealand, and I was invited to start a family treatment center. And I didn't know anything of family treatment, but I was lucky, because that was just in the start of the systemic period. And I thought, well, that's a good idea to work like that. And we had all the families, they were really troubled families, and we started off working with this, newly developed systemic theory. And what I found out was it worked for some, but there was so many families where the problems they had run in generations, and they sort of came into the family treatment centre, and if we were lucky, they phoned us and said, sorry, we can't come today, and then they just, they didn't come anymore. And I thought to myself, well, there must be something that we could do, so it wasn't only those people that could profit from this fantastic systemic method. And that was just in those days when Dan Stern and all the way of looking at intersubjectivity, looking at now moments, had come online. So I thought to myself, well, probably it's the implicit knowledge that we just can't reach these parents, these kids, with our very narrative-based methods. It must be possible to do something else, but I didn't really know what. But at the same time, I was in this group with adult psychiatry, and we invited very many psychotherapists that had a knowledge with working with PTSD, body therapy work, and I thought, well, I think there's something here that we can merge together. And after I had been a leader for this family treatment center, I went into child psychiatry to find out how the whole diagnosing system, how it works. And I was a bit taken back, because we were sitting around the round table and we just, kicked off diagnosis at conferences. And I thought, they're not very precise, this diagnosing system, that surely must be a better way of doing this. And then I became familiar with Bruce Perry's work and was very intrigued by it. And that was really the beginning of NADP, to see if it's possible to merge so many people, so many scientists, so many researchers, good work together, but mostly as an idea of how to be able to get it into the clinical practice. Because I thought for so many years that it seems like so much good work, it stays within the research world and it doesn't get into practice. And I thought, well, research, why are we making research? It must be because it's supposed to be brought into practice. So that was what I was fond of doing through all these years, and it's 14 textbooks later, I'm sitting here.
And you discovered neurobiology and combine that with psychology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Biology and psychology, how it merged together, and how much we need all the implicit knowledge before taking in the explicit knowledge.
very exciting that you discovered this because you was in the surroundings where people didn't think of that. Family therapy do not think of. Usually some people do.
Yes, and I think, so much therapy is so narrative-based, and it's not because I have anything against narrative therapy, but it's just when you find these people with huge, massive problems that have had so little caring when they were kids, it seems like there's different methods that they profit from, but it was so difficult to find these methods. And it seems as if approximately 90-95% of all the intervention methods we've got, they're narrative-based. And I think we're in so great need for something that music therapy, and rhythms, and something that works on the implicit level of the nervous system.
Bruce, I think you probably pick up right there.
Sure. First of all, I would also like to congratulate you for an impressive life work. I can appreciate how challenging it is to try to integrate the good thinking from different disciplines. It's an ongoing process. One of the big things that I think we've spoken about this before is that there are so many good people doing good work in different arenas, but frequently they don't even know anything at all about what's going on in the other person's lab or discipline. So you've done a wonderful job always trying to weave that in. And I have to say, when I read your dissertation, I'm like, holy crap, I don't know, what is she talking about? I had to go back and read stuff. And it was clear that you know a lot more about a lot of these disciplines than I do. So congratulations. Your dissertation was a very scholarly piece of work. And the thing that I like about what you just said about bringing these concepts and things that we're learning in research to bear in the clinical setting is also very much at the heart of what we're trying to do. We're trying to actually develop practical and explorable ways to help clinicians think about these more complex concepts. And so I just have a couple of sort of practical questions. How long does it take to administer these metrics?
Well, we've developed it together with Borgrefe, and we have learned that as short time as possible. And so that means that the EDSP must be able to be conducted in 1 hour.
Okay.
And the assessment part, that's 46 questions, and we have tried to say to ourselves not more than an hour and a quarter. That's the most time it must take. It mustn't take any longer than that.
And so when you mentioned that you want multiple reporters to kind of give information in sort of responding or giving the psychologist information, how do you do that? Does a psychologist actually go look for this in the records, or do you convene a group of people, or do they reach out to different members, the people that are in the child's life? How does that actually work?
Well, you see, one thing is the way we want it to work, and the other thing was how it was used, and that's two different things. But the way it was intended was that the psychologists make the performance part first, and when they have made the performance part, they get in touch with teachers, pedagogues, parents, and want specific information that they haven't got themselves, so they don't have to meet all at the same time. So when the psychologists find they've got the information and they are able to judge that it's not just an internal representation from the parents or from the teacher, then they make the scoring.
Okay, good. And the other thing I can appreciate having, as you develop the instruments and you get facile and familiar with how to use them, your ability to do them in a certain period of time is going to be less than somebody who's just learning it, right?
Of course, yes.
And so, we've run into this issue with some of the things that we've done is that whole challenge of exporting and sort of teaching people how to use the instruments in the right way. And as you move forward with this, I'd just be curious about your thoughts about what you're thinking about how you're going to do that, how you're going to train people and sort of ensure that they actually have mastered.
Well, I think you're hitting into the most relevant but troublesome question, because what I do think is that questionnaires, they are very imprecise, because what you get is the person's own representation of themselves or their children. But of course you've got the same problem with a rater or psychologist. So I think the training is very, very important. But one thing is the training, the other part is the psychologist's self-agency. And the way first of all, that they are together with the child, and the way that they look at the scorings. So I think it's a huge problem how actually to do this. What we've thought about is, because we've also heard that the training has to be very, very small. We can't use a hell of a lot of time on the training. So what we've said to ourselves is that we'd like to make at least a 3-day training, and we would also like to see if it's possible to make some kind of certification with some kind of inter-rater reliability. But we know that that's the biggest challenge we have in front of us. But we do believe that that we'll get more correct information by training psychologists and by making a certification than just giving people a questionnaire or just asking pedagogues and teachers the question and getting their internal interpretations. But
in your dissertation study, though, how long was the training for the psychologist? Was it just that webinar you did?
Yes, it was too short. But the problem was that we didn't really we hadn't developed the method really, and I had to get into the empirical study, so there wasn't really time. But when the test has been, when it has been contributed, when they're going to sell this test, we're going to make a training. But Hågrefe told us that if we can't sell the test, if they have to take a certification, we can't have it distributed. So that's our big problem really. Because I do think it's necessary with the training.
So were we going to rotate? I didn't know how we were going to actually do this. Is this? I don't want to sort of hog the whole conversation because I could talk to Susan all day. So.
I'll just tell the audience that the three of us have never talked together until the stage. I got a chance to talk briefly with Bruce and briefly with Carl, and then Carl and I met right before this, but Bruce wasn't available, so yes, we're figuring things out as we go. We are going to rotate. If you have more questions along the same line, go ahead. And we also agreed...
I'm ready to pass.
Okay, we agreed that if any of us ask a question that someone wants to follow up on what the answer was, we will do that fluidly. So if Susan answers something I ask or Carl asks that you have a wondering about, please speak up.
Got it. Thank you.
I want to congratulate you on your integration of these very diverse areas and putting those all together. I echo Bruce's comments about you're basically merging silos, because we really do stay in our own compartments and don't much even read the literature beyond our area. So I want to congratulate you. My discussion is going to be more around your method. And there also is congratulations. I think you did an excellent job with the statistical analysis, with choosing appropriate statistical tests, and with reporting those quite clearly. So I do want to ask them about that, but I'm wondering if we should go to maybe this first.
Don't have your question.
And my question is, okay. Okay. Well, your testing did reveal a few, at least from these small samples, some weaknesses in the test. And for instance, on the EDSP There was a significant difference, but not on the limbic score. I didn't do the whole question. This is page 102 of your thesis. We'll find it. Is it 102 or is it 120? Is it 102? Is that right? Did you find it?
I think it's number 2, isn't it? Number 2 research question.
Oh.
Are you looking into my slides?
Yeah, well, just the bottom line is the limbic system, the limbic level is what really gave you trouble.
It did.
Everything else, like, oh, it matches the theory
yes.
and it's
Everything.
developmental sequence. And yes, if they get older, they develop and the scores are higher.
Exactly.
So talk a little bit about this limbic level.
I've put a slide up here because it's the progression we're looking at now, the mean scores. And what we see here is that the autonomic level on the referred, that was 82.75%, and on the non-referred, 90.79%. Yeah,
As expected.
as expected. If we look at the prefrontal level, we've got 71% and we've got 82%, 40. That's great too. We did see here on the limbic level that there is a difference, but it's not as big, it's not as huge as on the 2 other levels. And what we did see too is that that the large group of non-referred children showed highly developed prefrontal cortex. I'll just go back to the other slide again.
Which
slide. Just a minute. Slide what? Slide 19.
Defense slide 19.
The one we just saw before, with the...
Okay.
Because what I didn't mention here is that we've got the progression when we look at the referred. We like the 82% to be higher than the 74% and the 74% to be higher than the 71%.
You would expect that the lower brain functions to be more developed as age
Exactly,
progresses.
yes. We didn't see the same in the non-referred because the limbic is fairly low. It's much more even to the referred children than to the non-referred, which of course gave me a lot of thoughts.
That's what I'd like to hear.
That's what you'd like to hear? Okay, so let's have a look at that.
What number are you on now? 20.
So we've got the next one here, which is slide, what? It's slide 20. So it could be because referred is not associated with competencies on vulnerability on the limbic level. That could be, that could be an answer to it, that when children, they are referred, it's mostly because they've got acting out problems on the autonomic level, or they've got problems with impulse inhibition. So children, they are not referred because they've got problems with empathy. They get referred for something else. So that could be one of the answers to this. And refer has to do with vulnerabilities of self-regulation, so probably that's really why. And also that, I came to think of the society living in a Western culture, because I think that having cognitive capacity that is very highlighted in our society, and we talk about a lot about the lack of empathy, but actually when we look into the world, how we pedagogues, teachers, they help children with empathy, I don't think it's very highlighted actually. So we talk more about it than we see it's being done when we get into the professional work, and it seems like parents, they are more concerned with how their children, the marks in class than of their empathy. So probably it could have something to do with the society too.
I don't know how it is in Denmark, but in the States there's no affective education for typically developing children.
Exactly.
So it's very, very rare.
Yes. And here in Denmark, if it's done in a cognitive way. So you read about and you talk about, but to me, there's so much about emotional development, that's the synchronization and the affective attunement. So that's not really a part of what is about in the kindergartens and schools.
So I'm going to ask you to think about another possibility.
About?
I'm going to ask you to consider another possibility.
Yes.
Do you think that this reflects a correction that needs to be made in the theory or in the test? Either one.
Yes. Well, it could be both, of course, but before I dig into this, because Brucey said something in September which I thought was quite good.
He said that, congratulations, Bruce.
He said that the typical American kid, it worked, yes. The typical American kid spends 11 hours in front of a screen a day. And even when they're around in the presence of other people, they will spend more time texting than they will interacting with the person in front of them. So social communication in our culture is changing a lot. I don't know, he said, all the implications, but what I do know is that it is partly one of the many social elements that is required for a successful culture, which today is absent or are not being nurtured the way it should be in our part of the world. So after having said that, I'd like to dig into your question.
You're contributing Bruce's answer to my question. That's one way to do a defense.
But if I dig into the measurement tool first.
Yes.
And I had a look at the limbic level because I wanted to go more into to see how the items, how they were distributed on the limbic level. And what I did see is what you see here, that the limbic level consisted of 2 activities. And the 2 activities, of course, that was because we wanted we didn't want it to take more than 1 hour to get the information to know all the items, to be able to answer the items. So the limbic level consisted of 2 activities and 12 items. 7 items is one activity and 5 items is the other. The first activity, that was the one I presented here with all the different facial expressions, and the other activity, that's about the affective attunement that's amongst us. So I made a correlation of, does this correlate the child's way of being able to recognize categorical emotions in the face and being in an affective attunement. And it didn't really correlate, not all that well. So I thought there is a problem here that I'd like to look more into, which of course is more than what was in this study, but I think it's quite relevant to look into that, how it fits together. Being able to see categorical emotions, being able to show categorical emotions, and the way to look, digging into subjectivity. So, yes, so that's, I'd like to dig more into that concerning the method.
Yeah.
And then again, I'm not quite sure about the theory, because I really do think that we have explained a lot about the limbic level, because it's so well explained by Dan Stern and Ed Tronick and Colvin Trevarton. So I think, but I'm not sure, of course, but I think it's got more to do with our measurement tool, and probably has got something to do with the self-agency of the psychologist too, because it actually it needs a very skilled psychologist to be able to make the affective attunement. And as Bruce Perry said, that the more you get trained in doing it, the more you're able, as the rater, to make the affective attunement. While when a test is new, you get a more, you don't connect them that well.
Thank you.
Yeah, a follow-up question. You write that the psychology assesses whether the child is able to recognize emotional facial expression on limbic level. So point against some kind of representation in limbic level, which is mostly connected to connection and do you think it is so?
Yeah, well, what I would say is that already from the very birth, now you saw this little girl 4 weeks old, so what we see is that the imitation and the synchronization starts very, very early, and Colin Trevathan, he says that it starts the last trimester in the womb, actually. So we've got this inborn capacity to imitate, to synchronize, but it needs the life force from a caregiver to blow life into this system. And what I noticed, now I'm going, that's a bit into my clinical work, but when I worked at the child psychiatry ward, what I noticed was there were so many children with a reactive attachment disorder. They hadn't got sensations, you know, feeling pain, feeling when it's cold, when it's hot. So that it was like the perceptions, a way to sensate the body markers. They weren't there. So I dug into this and I thought to myself, well, it seems, you know, by reading all the brain research stuff, that it's got something to do with this brain part called insula. And what I also read was that these mirror neurons from the Italian researchers in 2002, an article was written, so it seems as if the life force through the synchronization, by all the facial expressions and muscles we've got in the face, that blows life into that system. And Antonio Damasio, he showed us these body markers, how they are brought into life. So really, I think that synchronization and imitation and the way that happens, that's really what brings the life force into the basic part of emotional development. And then on the limbic level, we've got the categorical emotions of anger and happy and sadness, because that's our social way of communicating affective attunement. So then we dig into the whole theory of Trevathan, Stone, and Tronick, and Sander, and Lysander.
I also work with multi-handicapped children, and they have very low cognitive function. And they recognize voices and faces, and they have differentiated feelings, emotions. So, shall I continue with another question?
Sure.
Most research on brain organization of emotion point towards integration of brain levels as basis for emotion.
I'm sorry, Kat, do you think we could ask the technicians just to take some of the echo off? Because it's so terribly difficult for me to hear what you say.
Is the technician here?
Yes, he's sitting behind over there.
Oh, he's hiding.
Well, is it better now?
That's better, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, I said that most research on brain organization of emotion points towards integration of brain levels as basis for emotion. And even Joseph Ledoux, who found fear in amygdala, traces of fear, is now talking about the cognitive emotional network. And most researchers are that, but you stick to your levels.
Well, I do stick to my levels, but it's...
When I saw your presentation, I think maybe you are measuring integration of these 3 levels and how they are integrated.
So, are we talking about the categorical emotions right now? Are we talking about the...
I think the prefrontal
the prefrontal,
autonomic, those levels.
Yes,
right?
Because what... Now, I'm not sure if I'm answering you the right way, but then you must prompt me if it's necessary. Because what I do see, and that's through sheer observation, that is that if you look at an infant under 2 months of age, you'd see 2 categorical emotions. That's disgust, if you give them liver, you know, they do like that with the face, and fear. So you see the fear reactions from the very beginning. And then you see these facial expressions but they're not really categorical emotions besides fear and disgust. And then you've got the limbic level, and the first categorical emotion normally that comes to life, that's happy. And you see the parent and the child, they start to play together. I'm coming to get you, coming and get you. And then after that you see sadness and you see anger as two categorical emotions. But in my point of view, and I know that's really debatable, there's a lot of different theory about that, but in my opinion, you don't see shame and pride before the child is about 1 year of age. So that's hitting into the prefrontal level. But I know this is very, that's really something that could be discussed. There's so much different theory about this.
Yeah. Because the more cognition it is in emotion, less later you see it in development.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, one of the things that is, I'm glad that you used the word heuristic when you presented your model, because the truth is that the way we're thinking about it, that's not the way the brain works. The brain works through neural networks that course through multiple regions of the brain.
True.
And, one of the challenges, and this is even one of the big challenges with neuroimaging. So when you get a neural image and you see one part of the brain that lights up and you go, oh, that's because they were thinking about music. Well, that's not true. That's not the music thinking center of the brain. That's just, that's just not how the brain works. It's a dynamic, these are very complex dynamic networks that cross multiple areas of the brain. And one of the things that I think is, again, just, I think that as you think about this, one of the things that I would just, obviously this is just a point in time in the development of your academic career and your academic work. And what I would encourage you to think about as you further develop either this tool or you're thinking about this is where does sort of state-dependent functioning fit in your tool, for example? So I would suspect that the performance of a child in one moment, when they feel safe and connected to the psychologist, will be completely different than if they had an interaction with a psychologist after they had a dysregulating day and the psychologist was not very attuned and regulating, and they have very different scores. And so I'm curious about, number one, I'm sure you have seen this, and then how you think about managing that in the future. And then the other, related to that is the issue of, do you think that your scale of 1 to 4 is giving you enough discriminative, capability to track outcomes? Because when we first developed our metrics, for example, when we had our stuff was 1 to 4, we would see clinically somebody make significant progress, and everybody would go, wow, that's great. But then they went, on a really 1 or 2 or 3 items, they went from a 2 to a 3, and that numerically doesn't really jump out at you. So I'm just curious what you thought about those two issues, state dependence and sort of the discriminative capability of the tool.
Well, to answer the first question first, we are quite aware that traits become states. We're quite aware that the child could have had a bad or good day, and we're also very aware that being in an exclusive room with a psychologist that's very supportive could give you a completely different opinion of the child being in a classroom where everything happens at the same time. And that was really the reason why we said to ourselves, well, we have to have an assessment method to know how the child reacts out of the room, the clinical room where we make the performance test. We have to know something about the regression tendency, the dissociative tendency, which might not happen in the therapeutical room. So that was really why, and that's really why we are very keen of having the EDSA and the EDSP connected very much more than I have in my empirical study, because there is obviously a big problem here. So, and regarding the scale, I really wish that the representative from Hawkeye is here, because that's been a big discussion, because we just thought that we're just going to try this out as a pilot project, and we thought that we were told that when the pilot project was finished, then we could do something about the scale, because we wanted a much more widened scale than the 1 to 4, but then they said to us, well, we've made the standardization from the scale 1 to 4, so now you're not allowed to change it. So we're really in a big discussion about that really at the moment. So I really hope that this, what you're telling me now, is being heard.
Well, you may want to get a new partner. Just throwing it out there. That's sort of an American thing, but I'll respect the way you all want to do it. But I think you should just do what you think is right. If you think the change is going to make the instrument more useful, make the change.
I really, because we've been so upset about this point, actually, because we don't actually think that a scale going from 1 to 4 is enough.
Excellent. I feel, I don't know about all the arrangements, but, when you come back from your doctoral dissertation defense, you tell that.
Do that, because Dr. Hart will have the authority to tell them. And that goes to another question of and actually you probably already touched on it, is the clinical utility of using it to measure progress in therapy. It sounds like your feeling is that at this point, with the narrow range of markers, it's unlikely to be useful for using that way, which could be a selling point for your company. We can sell more of them if they'll also show progress in them.
And actually, I'm really very... when we started off making a test like this, we didn't know how big work it is. In the beginning, we just thought this is a piece of cake. But I really reconsidered. It's just so much work, and I mean, we've got. This is where we've got at right now, but there's so much more work we have to put into it before we really have a better instrument.
So, I think the clinical utility of any instrument that would essentially diagnose where the problem is in its usefulness to point to specific treatment, or what type of treatment would be appropriate for the child, or what approach to treatment.
Yes.
So, can you say something about what this skill does in that way?
Well, in my point of view, being in a psychiatric ward for 3 years and seeing the way that children there are diagnosed at the moment, I know in this country approximately 1 out of 10 children, they get a diagnosis in the psychiatric system. And I know from 2006 until 2016, there's been a 91% rise in diagnosing children. And I think, I don't think it's of any help to stigmatize children that way. So what I really do hope, everything can be misused though, but what I really do hope that it's not just another way of diagnosing, that it's really a tool to help to find the proximal zone of emotional development, but also a way to say we've got all these very, very many different intervention methods, but it seems as if the psychologist or the psychotherapist, they fall in love with one certain type of method, and then they think that it fits all sizes. Instead of, finding different types of intervention methods and make the right method to the right person so it matches. And it's not a question of the psychotherapist being in love. It has to work for the person you want to help.
Ideally. Do you think that the results of your test, for especially EDSP, which you have some pretty strong results for, would, when the psychologist finishes the assessment and presents this to the treatment team or to the therapist, will that help inform the therapist? You talked about their emotional development, so at least aiming at the right level.
I do believe it will. It is not a perfect instrument, but I do believe it will help. Mm-hmm. And actually, we have taken the EDS together with my colleague Marianne Benson, who's sitting right there, and we've tried to squash the EDS A into 15 questions, and that's not a perfect way of making a way of understanding the child. But what we found out, that is, taking these 5 questions on the autonomic level, on the 5 questions on the limbic level, 5 questions on the prefrontal level, that it makes the pedagogues and the teachers think a different way about the child. So I think it's a new way of navigating, really, which I do think the NMT is too.
So it may affect the therapist's thinking.
Exactly.
About how they conceptualize the child and their needs.
Exactly.
If I take an example of a typical referred child, you hear me clearly there?
A typical referred child, yes.
It is a child that is clearly aware of his emotion, for instance sadness, but he does not accept that he is sad and does not show it. He tries to be joyful. How would you say your 3 levels are involved in this child?
Well, first of all, I'd say I'd need more information.
Good.
So that would be the first thing I would say. But the next thing I'd say, just as to use it as an example and not talking about a specific child. Yeah. So, sadness, which I think is a limbic capacity, really. I do think, having our emotions, that's a limbic capacity. But you can have, to use MacLean's concept, that it's not a triune brain, it's a brain that disagrees with each other. So having a prefrontal cortex that doesn't want to accept the emotion that's there, that gives them an imbalance in the psychic system, which is a completely different imbalance than, for instance, if you've got a child with a reactive attachment disorder, because there you'd see much more imbalances on the autonomic level. But talking about, that type of referred child, I'd say it's the prefrontal cortex that controls too much. It's too much acts of will. So it's like, getting this child to accept that there's something in life called grief, there's something in life called sadness, and that's quite acceptable.
So he's too active in his prefrontal level, you would say?
Yes, I'd say that, that it sounds, it's just an example, but it sounds as too much control, too much acts of will, that, sort of squash the limbic level.
Bruce, do you have a question?
No, well, I don't have a specific question. I always like talking with Susan about stuff, so so I'm curious, how have, when you selected the psychologist, did these folks volunteer, or did you say, hey, I have this new thing, and people said, oh, that's great, I want to do it?
Well, one thing was my empirical study, with the 36 children, and the other thing was the Hallgreffe study. So, which one would you like me to go into?
Well, I guess part of what I'm trying to get at is, what's been the reception of your psychology colleagues about this tool? When you talk about it, when people use it, what kind of feedback do they give you about it?
Well, first of all, of course, the feedback, of course, was they needed more training. So that was, very important feedback. What we also noticed was that it was a help when the psychologists, they knew something about the NADP understanding for those that didn't know anything about it. And then what we heard too was that they agreed that it was strange that we've got all these measurement tools telling something about cognitive development, and but it's so difficult with emotional development, and most colleagues have said to me, we really needed it. The problem was having time to actually use it.
Right. It's interesting. One of the things that's happened, and I've seen this happen in a lot of areas in psychiatry, it really happens in all fields, but you end up measuring the things that you are able to measure, and therefore you generate all your hypotheses and theories around stuff that you're able to measure. This is why cortisol became so important in this trauma story, but in fact, in reality, it's a very minor component of the whole array of neurobiological things that happen under stress. But we can measure it. And you can measure it now easily, so that's why people end up sort of going nuts about cortisol, when in fact there's all kinds of other stuff that are just as important, but we can't measure. I think that's kind of what's happened with the cognitive stuff. It's so much easier to kind of measure certain aspects of cognitive functioning than it is to operationalize and measure emotion. And, again, the emotion is not my main field, obviously, but there are people that have literally spent their lives studying really what are the fundamental emotions that humans have, and reclassifying them and categorizing them. And so I think that one of the things that you've done that's very commendable is that you just, you jump right in and you've tried to operationalize and measure emotion, which is a hard thing to do. But I think it's a really needed thing. It's a necessary element of what will contribute to our field. But just because it's a messy field, and I think that this is the kind of stuff you're going to run into. Is that the construct that we thought was sort of connected to the limbic system really, in reality, it's a little more complex than that. And so the construct isn't sort of parsing out exactly the way we thought of it. And so this kind of the question I have, again, I keep getting to this whole thing about next steps. What are you going to do with this stuff? Because what you're finding out is that this is really complex, and it sounds like one of your reactions was to try to come up with a simple version. And the other thing I'm pushing you to do is come up with a more complex version. And how are you gonna? What are you gonna do with all that?
Well, actually, I don't really know, because when the first version of the EDS, it consisted of 110 items, and of course we knew that we had to cut them down. So, I thought it was just so different. I mean, it's like making a thesis. You have to kill so many darlings on your way. And that was what we had to do here, and because otherwise we have developed an instrument, a tool, which is not going to be used. And I think, in a way that's not very satisfactory, really. But on the other hand, it's not satisfactory developing a tool that's not going to be used. So, and I do agree, it is very, very complex. And I think, the most complex part of emotions, that is the implicit part of it. And that's why I think there's so many cognitive tests around, because everything's so explicit. So it's how to grasp the implicit level, and then we've got the problem with the rate of self-agency, because if we have to have something with effective attunement, that plays a huge important part. So what we actually can't be sure of is, are they rating themselves or are they rating the child? So, I quite agree. It's so complicated, and I think, I'd like to cite John Bowlby, who said, well, we've got a theory, but theories, they change when we have new research and when the world changes. So it's just, it's just the first way of grasping it in a different way. But I don't believe that I have found the Holy Grail here.
Do you intend to continue being a psychometrician, the developer of psychometrics? It's not fun, is it?
Being a clinician is fun.
Well, I would urge you to not. I think it's very, very important that people with lived clinical experience try to sort of operationalize that. And I think that so many of the metrics that have been developed are by people who've never seen the patient. And so you have tools that are sometimes tangential to the issue. And I think that what you're doing is very hard, but I think it's very worthwhile. And so I would encourage you to keep trying to improve and learn from this experience.
Thank you, Bruce. And I think it's that when you have begun, you can't stop.
Well, Susan, I have a final question. You are a very experienced clinician, researcher in terms of publications, well-known in your field, very experienced in your field. You had been working with these multiple theories from multiple directions for years before you started this work. What new did you learn?
What new did I learn?
In completing this thesis?
What I learned. Well, actually, I'd really like to talk about some of my surprises. I just, have to find the right slide. Slide 29.
Oh, thank you for giving me the number.
So, the thing that surprised me the most, that was the uncertainty of what the EDSA really, what it measures. Mm-hmm. But of course that gave me a lot of thoughts, because the difference between the mean scores of the EDSP and the EDSA with regard to the predictive validity was quite interesting. So, in a way I'd like to dig a bit into that. And I'm just going to see here, because, if we look at slide 31, what we see here is the EDSP, and I made a questionnaire for the psychologists that made the ratings of the EDSP and especially the EDSA. What actually did they score from? And most of the psychologists, they came back and told me that they had scored by interviewing the parents, and it was more or less the parents that decided the scoring. So actually it was the internal representations of the parents more than it was an assessment of how the child actually behaved out of the room where the rater and the child, they were together. So actually I think that's what we see in the picture here, that actually what we see, and I think that I'll show it on the next slide because it's more easy to see, that if we look at the non-referred children, we've got only on the autonomic level a difference between what the psychologists rated on the autonomic level and the parents. There was a 0.65% difference, so that was, quite equal. And if we look at the prefrontal level, well, the parents, they thought that the child was about 5.31% better than what the psychologist in the performance test actually saw. But if you look on the limbic level, which was quite low in the performance part, the parents, they judged the child 14.25% better, which is the empathetic part. So what we actually see here, that is that the parents, in my point of view, the parents in representations of the child, but if the child behaves well, if the child is able to self-regulate on the autonomic and prefrontal levels, they get overestimated on the empathic level. But if we look at the referred children, there is a negative bias here. So they are, on all levels, they are looked, on the parents, they don't see their capacities that well. And what we know from Dan Stern is that a child needs always to see a bit of front ahead of their actual capacity, which the parents, they do here on the autonomic and prefrontal level, but it's a bit over-exaggerated on the limbic level, but it's opposite with the referred children. So that they don't really, in my point of view, it may reveal that they don't get the help they actually need.
The child doesn't get the help when they're referred. So I'm going to close this because of time. This has been really exciting discussion. Thank you for the presentation and for the discussion. You're obviously very excited about this topic. And I will echo Bruce's push, should we say, to continue this work and to continue to refine this and to go into your publisher and say, I am Dr. Hart. So, is Tina here somewhere? Yeah. We have to abandon this hall. It's one reason we're stopping now.
So am I not completely on yet?
No, not on yet.
But I am, nope. It's okay.
I took the wrong ones. Well, actually, it's only been an hour. So if you actually do have
we have time.
Yeah, we actually have more time. But I'm not sure whether you're done or not, or whether maybe it's the stage. I don't know. Do you have, I think you have time, if you like, more time.
Here I am watching for 11:15, the clock says.
I just want to, yeah.
I'm good. Actually, I'm curious whether anybody in the audience has any comments or questions.
Audience question. Okay.
If they've read the dissertation.
Exactly. So, is anybody in the audience who read the thesis? It's not such a big thesis, 38 pages. Yes? Do you have a question? No. I'll just give you time to dare. Okay, anybody who did not read the thesis who might have a question?
Yes, there's one.
Where? Yes. So you need to come up here, because I'm not sure. Oh, can I give him the mic? Yes, I can. Okay, catch.
Hi, Susan. If I got it right, you saw it as a problem that in the two activities, they didn't correlate in the score between recognizing emotions and acting upon them. And I'm just thinking, should they correlate? Don't we have like millions of psychopaths, just to name a few, to exemplify that recognizing emotions and giving a shit about them is not necessarily the same thing?
Well, obviously it's not the same thing, because, I mean, that was, well, of course there's a small sample size, of course I don't totally know, but, and I quite agree, it is also two different things, but in a way I was surprised that they didn't correlate better than they did. But then again, you know, there was a tendency too that, you know, that when I looked at the numbers, there was correlations, but of course being able to distinguish anger and shame and you know, all the emotions, that correlated more or less, but even there, you know, the correlation between anger and being happy, they didn't correlate all that well either. So you know, what I noticed was that it was different what type of emotions that these children, they recognized and which they didn't. But of course it correlated much, much better than looking at the intersubjectivity. But, and probably you're right, probably it's not necessary, but again there must be some kind of correlation between them, but I'm not completely sure of how to understand it yet. So probably if you ask me in about 6 months, it's going to be clearer for me.
One more from the audience.
Hi, Susan. So I took up courage to ask you a question, and it might not be the question you would expect from me, and bear with me if it's silly. The tests or the emotional actors, those things, right? Could you enlighten me on how and if they were validated?
Of how it was validated?
Yes, if the actors actually were they genuine, like how was that validated?
Well, it wasn't validated in a statistical way, to put it that way. So, what we did was we made, a pilot study. So it was brought out to many psychologists, and we asked, and I've brought him with it to a lot of lectures. I've made keynotes, and when I looked at the audience, it seems very. It wasn't difficult, it didn't seem like difficult, but it hasn't been validated in a strict research way, to put it that way. More in a clinical way.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think that I'd like to thank all of you here on stage, and to you, Bruce, all the way over there. Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting, lively discussion and sharing as well. So I will declare this defense closed now. And what will happen now is that we will go up the stairs, and then you'll have to go downstairs to the lawyer foyer, nedre foyer, where we will wait with Susan. The bar will hopefully be open. You can buy yourself a glass. While we wait for the committee to come back and tell us what they think. So let's give them all a warm applause.
Det er ikke. Ja, en god varme. Nu er det lige før, Susan. Og vi havde en enkelt gæst, som skulle være så lidt forløb. Ikke nok. Det er noget, vi har, fordi vi har udviklet altså, vi har så meget fristil. Det kan det når man
Thank you for waiting. It's my pleasure to announce that the committee has come to the unanimous decision that Susan Hart be recommended for the PhD degree from Aalborg University.
Silly hats. This is because this is a tradition here in this faculty
Yeah.
Holding Bruce.
Holding Bruce. I have something for you, Susan, which is from all of us, which is from the PhD program. And it's been a great honor to have you on our course. It's been a great privilege to have you join us in discussions, share ups and downs, and just to have you part of the family. Really, truly, we are grateful, and of course, from now on and from all eternity, you have to wear this nose. You are so very welcome with us. So, congratulations so much with your PhD, Dr. Whoa. Well, thank you ever so much. And I have a few presents for the committee members. So here, probably Kathy, Bruce, can be in Carl's hand for just a moment.
Hand over Bruce.
So Kathy, thank you ever so much. And I know you've been with me, you know, more or less in some of the process, even though we haven't been talking so much to each other, but I know you've in the background been a great help. And thank you so much for digging into my thesis. Thank you ever so much. So now I give Bruce to Kathy. And Carl, we met in Trondheim some years ago with a very good friend that's not here with us anymore, but we had a fantastic time, the time we had together, and I was so delighted to be invited to your university. As you know, I'm not very popular in the Danish universities, so thank God that me elsewhere. So thank you so much. It's a little troll from Norway, because much of my thesis has been written in Norway, actually. So you can take it with you back home. Hi, Bruce. And I'd like to give you a present too. So I suppose it's on your table, is it?
It's actually it's in a different place because I'm so excited about opening it later today.
Okay, so your grandson is going to open, so you haven't got it with you?
No,
You don't. So probably we should have Carl and Kathy to open theirs, because then you'd actually know what's in yours. So I just, you know.
Oh, there's the statue that's on the cover.
Just tear everything apart.
Yeah, you'll be the first one.
Just for the fun of it. So, this is an opportunity. So that was a book that my young person and I wrote together. And the two picture books of neuroaffective developmental psychology, all in English.
Okay, go catch your plane. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you for joining. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Bruce.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. And, you know, then I just like where is he? Four. Because I know that...
congratulations. I'm so happy to be part of the group. So that's fantastic.
But here is a little something for you, because I know you're leaving in a moment, so I just wanted to give this to you now.
Honestly,
You're always on the run.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Like, really cool, I love the stuff.
I'd just like to say so much thank you. You know, it's been great to have you as a backing group. Because, you know, it makes it so much easier to make a speech. I have made so many trials of my speech, and it was so dead because there was nobody in front of me. So thank you so much for being there. Before we finish off, I'd like us to finish off with that song that's on the paper that you got. And I know that Gustavo and Nick, they're going to help us sing it.
Is there another hit?
Are there any more?
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Susan already did some introduction to this song, and the thing is, this song is usually sung in a way that kind of combines many of the things that Susan talks about, because the verses need to be quite flexible in the way that they're sung, whereas the chorus is quite fixed. And what we will try to attempt is to have you guys attune to this lovely fella while we sing this song together. So we indulge you guys to please sing along the best you all like. All right. And we're inspired by the whole discussion that we saw previously in the moment that we have never actually met before this very moment. So it's going to end up wonderfully. Oh, my eyes have seen the glory of the theories of Freud. He has told me all the evils that I ignore. Repression of the impulses result in paranoid as the end goes marching on. Glory, glory, psychotherapy. Glory, glory, sexuality. Glory, glory, now we can be free as the end goes marching on. There was a man who taught his friends to him. list will cure you long as you can pay the checks as the ink goes marching on. All together now. Glory, glory, psychotherapy. Glory, glory, sexuality. Glory, glory, now we stand be free as the ink goes marching on. It's your point laid by hates and pains that you can understand. Come on, and rolling through the melodies. The secrets to your trouble, doing it all with your own hand as the ink goes marching on. Glory, glory, psychotherapy. Glory, glory, sexuality. Glory, glory, now we can be free as the ink goes marching on. Frustrating world of meaning needs to have us mystified. It's really very simple what your psyche tries to hide. A thing that's valid simple is as longer than it's right as the ink goes marching on. Glory, glory, psychotherapy. Glory, glory, sexuality. Glory, glory, now we can be free as the ink goes marching on.